Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this special session of Humanity Rising as we consider the frontier of the human ET relationship and encounter through remote viewing. This is something that we've been spending more and more time with here at Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising as we've been producing program after program on the disclosure that's beginning to happen primarily from the U.S. government and government agencies and contracting corporations and members of the Congress and the Senate and members of the intelligence community and the military for reasons that I think ultimately remain obscure. The United States government has decided to release information that it and other governments have coercively kept secret for the past 80 years. And beginning really in 2017 with Lou Elizondo and the New York Times and David Grush and congressional testimony and various enactments by the U.S. Congress. And without public pressure, the government of the United States has stated very clearly that it is in possession of what it calls technologies of unknown origin, non-human technologies, and non-human intelligences, and asserted it has retrieved alien craft, retrieved alien biologics, and that controlled disclosure is underway. Just yesterday, Congresswoman Luna and other congressional representatives established a special task force to release classified information about the Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, and unidentified anomalous phenomena. So incrementally, inexorably, the truth that we are not alone, that extraterrestrial intelligences and beings and civilizations are present on our planet and have had contact and ongoing communication, possibly treaty protocols with humans, with governments, even a classified secret space program is in the process of being disclosed. Initially, the conversation, which continues, is about the hardware. Retrieve craft, retrieve biologics, reverse engineering to try to figure out how do we use ET technology to advance human technology. And the growing assertion is that most of what came out of Silicon Valley since the 1960s was in fact inspired by reverse engineering of alien craft. What we want to dwell on is what is emerging as the frontier of our encounter with the non-human intelligences, which I prefer to call the extraterrestrials because it makes it more real, less disembodied. And that is that the people that have encountered them one way or another universally assert that they communicate through mental telepathy. They're fluent in consciousness. And so for human beings to enter the full opportunity of our cosmic moment and begin to get to know these beings, we have to learn consciousness. We have to learn mental telepathy. We have to learn how to both communicate and build community with intelligences that are completely non-human, but are showing up on our planet as very advanced beings. So it was in this spirit that Ubiquity University, in the fall of 2023, established the Extraterrestrial Awareness and Communications program, leading to master's and PhD degrees. Because we were aware and interested in the hardware, but much more fundamentally, we've been interested in how we humans, in this crucial moment in history, where we're literally on the verge of self-destruction, how can we save ourselves through elevating our consciousness to a sufficient degree that we can create the solutions that we need, knowing that Einstein's axiom is fundamentally true, that the consciousness that produces the problem can't solve the problem. How do we catalyze new consciousness when we're locked in the consciousness of the old problem? I believe that's why the extraterrestrials have shown up. They're the pathway to the elevation and refinement of consciousness that humanity deeply yearns for. But because we're trapped in the old consciousness, we keep making the mistakes over and over and over again. And now we've brought ourselves to the brink of extinction. And here come the ETs. And what they've been saying for the 80 years that we've been paying attention, knowing they've been here far longer than that, to the humans that they've encountered and communicated with, overwhelmingly is stop proliferating your nuclear weapons and stop degrading the environment. So Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising are dedicated to the proposition that the most important thing humans need to do now is learn what I call the mother tongue. We have to learn the language of consciousness. We speak English, we speak Greek, we speak Hebrew, we speak Chinese. We know how to learn languages. And becoming fluent in consciousness is the key to the solutions we seek and is the key to securing the human future. And that's why Ubiquity has partnered with Bertie Jaworski, who's been on Humanity Rising a number of times, and her Transdimensional Mapping Institute, which is state-of-the-art remote viewing and mental telepathy training. We have a whole certificate program with transdimensional mapping and courses that will be rolling out over the next year, 18 months. We have a partnership that's in formation with the Monroe Institute. The Monroe Institute is probably the leading organization anywhere on consciousness studies and the paraphenomenal. And so Ubiquity University is taking this matter deeply seriously and our extraterrestrial studies program, as far as we know, is the only university and academic program explicitly in extraterrestrial studies with the explicit purpose of teaching humans how to increase their awareness and how to engage in intelligible communication with extraterrestrials with a view of building community. Because they're here. They're not going away. And in fact, their presence is pressing down upon us subtly, but increasingly palpably, as we've seen from months now of orbs appearing all over the world. And remote viewers telling us that it's only going to increase. So our capacity to learn remote viewing and mental telepathy and communicate with these beings is a matter, I would say, of national security priorities. So one of the courses that we have coming up is a course in remote viewing. And I would like to now welcome the two faculty that are going to be teaching the course. David Harker, who is a remote viewer, a mystic, and he's the convener of the podcast, The Pyschic Guys. And Luigi Sciambarella, who works with the Monroe Institute as one of their residential trainers and outreach coordinators. So David and Luigi, open up your videos, and I welcome you to Humanity Rising. It's wonderful to have you and
Thank you,
talk
Jim.
about your upcoming course.
Thanks, Jim. Hi.
In our ET Studies program. We'll put the links to the ET Studies program, everyone, and the link to their course, because we want to encourage all of you to take the time to begin to learn about remote viewing and remote perception. So let's start with each of you just telling briefly your story, how you got involved in remote viewing, and what you're currently doing with this extraordinary facility that all humans have, but you two have it with particular enhanced clarity, I would say. So David, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, 6 or so years ago, I was a software engineer and a muggle, for want of a better term. I was very much, the mainstream materialist reductionist worldview that gets baked in from childhood. And I had a completely unexpected spiritual awakening event, which nothing really happened. There weren't trumpets from heaven, but I knew that my life had taken a turn, and I had to pursue investigating what this was, which led me down all sorts of different rabbit holes. And I found that I couldn't discern between what was grifting and nonsense and gossip and reality. I could tell that there was something out of place. I'd got something wrong. But what I needed was a empirical way of testing this. I needed something I could try for myself to verify what's going on here. And eventually, after going down every different conspiracy, wacky rabbit hole on the internet for months, the YouTube algorithm recommended a Russell Targ video about remote viewing to me. And I said, that can't be real. But I told myself I was going to be empirical. So I tried it anyway with the expectation that it wouldn't work. And I was there looking forward to when it didn't work so I could feel smug about how well I understood reality. And then, of course, it did work, which set me off on a whole other journey. And I've been practicing remote viewing for 5 or 6 years. But, it's just gone 6 years now, ever since, and exploring what that has to teach us about consciousness and the nature of being human and information and understanding. And as you mentioned earlier, Jim, the language of consciousness, or learning our own language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. Do you want to say just something quickly about that initial spiritual awakening that you had? Was it a result of psychedelics? Was it a result of some trauma?
No, not at all.
You're sitting there minding your own business, and you had
I was laying in bed and I was ruminating on entirely mundane questions about investment for the future and geopolitics and interpersonal relations, just normal things that you might wonder about. And I hit a point where I realized that none of my models of how the world worked. None of them made testable predictions or useful predictions or were correct. They were just a bunch of ideas. And you know the Zen koans where they ask impossible riddles which you can't solve. And the idea is it sort of crashes the intellect. It causes it to reboot. And I think that's what happened. The idea is that when you somehow, by whatever means, by meditation or koans or by a blow to the head, you kind of hard reset, pull
Gotcha.
the power cord out of the intellect and put it back on, it takes away a level of self-inflicted illusion which is habitually there, and you see or experience an expanded state of consciousness. And it was just for a moment. Afterwards, I would say everything was different, but nothing was different. Everything looked different, but it didn't visually appear different. It just everything had changed, and yet nothing had. And the only thing that I really knew afterwards was I'm not going to be able to ignore this and put the cat back in the bag. I'll have to investigate. But that was it. And it was about 11:30 at night, and I thought, right, well, I'm not going to do it tonight, am I? So I just went to bed and dealt with it over the coming years.
Yeah, the sacred and the mundane are so intimately intertwined. You can slip from one state into the other and then fall fast asleep. Good for you. Good for you. Luigi, tell us your story.
I'll try to give you the condensed version. The condensed version is that when I was 7 years old, I woke up one morning and I saw my dead grandmother leaning out of a painting of the Madonna that was hung up on the wall. I'm not talking the music artist Madonna, the Virgin Mary. My family is Roman Catholic, and that scared the crap out of me. And I had just enough of the wherewithal to ask, "Are you my grandmother?" in Italian. She was Italian, and she said yes, and I'm in a place full of light. And then I found myself waking up again, and I went downstairs and I told my mother, and she said, "Well, that's really weird because your brothers just told me the same thing," and that was weird. That we both had a similar experience. I mean, he was a cooler customer. He's like 4 years older than I am, so he was able to have more of a conversation with my grandmother. But the fact that we had a similar sort of experience and shared it independently to my mother, and I mean that wasn't that was just the start of weird things. I mean, just my grandmother, she pretty much came through to everybody except my granddad. My granddad was like, "What's her problem? Why isn't she coming to me?" And maybe I'd be able to advise him now, which is like, just relax. You're a bit too close to this, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
grief and trying too hard.
Had she just died?
She died maybe about a month before, something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
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 But I mean, I tell this story sometimes because people ask me in podcasts and whatnot, and the typical question that comes was, "Oh, right, well, did you dream about her because you were grieving?" No. And that's what's, I know it's going to sound a little bit weird, but I was born in England and she was in Italy, and this is seven. So, at the time, I mean, maybe I'd seen her a small handful of times. I mean, maybe 3 times in my life. And so I didn't really have a big grief response when my grandmother died. I mean, it could be a year or two before I'd see her. That would be like a third of my life. So I found it really odd. But what it immediately did was it answered a question that I wasn't even asking, which was about the survival of consciousness beyond the physical. The last time I'd seen my grandmother, she was yellow. She had jaundice because she died of cirrhosis of the liver. So my last experience of my grandmother in the physical was that she was dying in a hospital, looking yellow. She looked amazing and radiant when I saw her coming out of the picture. So I thought, okay, you survive, you can communicate in a dream-like space, because remember, I thought I'd woken up and then I woke up again, and it was kind of like, well, what's going on there? This kind of transition between sleep and waking, or waking and sleeping, this kind of hypnopompic or hypnagogic state. And that actually, yeah, you can maybe, you know, if you train yourself, you can learn to communicate. Now, my family, being Roman Catholic, you know, thought, well, don't mess with that kind of stuff, and so I thought, well, I don't know what I was messing with, because I wasn't really trying anything. But there's like a bit of superstition, especially in the south of Italy. They talk about evil eye and all this kind of like, oh, you don't want to be bothering things. So I learned to shut up about it and not do too much, but it was always in the back of my mind. And so I studied psychology. And I quickly found out, especially when I was an undergrad at university, that the understanding of consciousness was very, very limited. It's an epiphenomenon. It's a byproduct of things bashing together and electrical circuits doing things, and then poof, you've got something that is consciousness, and that didn't wash with me. So I got interested in parapsychology, and that's what led me to find out about the Monroe Institute. And I started spending a lot of time at university in a lab doing hypnosis, self-hypnosis for many, many hours, and spontaneously having out-of-body experiences and lucid dreams as a byproduct of that. Thankfully, I was reading Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body quite early on when these experiences were happening, because there was a really nice framework of his experiences and things like the vibrational state and floating sensations, and you know, this kind of spectrum of consciousness that you could explore. And I got really interested in that and started to use the binaural beat technology, hemisync at the time, and bit by bit I just got the bug. And after university, I found Monroe was a place to visit. I visited there, did several programs, and somehow I got dragged into being a trainer and being on the board. So that's the kind of short of it. But you know, the main thing that drives me is exactly what you were talking about right at the beginning. You know, the consciousness is non-local. What does that mean? And I have a very neat story of the self, which I lean into daily, but that is just a fraction of who and what I am, and who and what we are, as we find with all the participants that come through our doors. So it's quite a journey, really.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's interesting that your journey led you to the Monroe Institute, and you've been with them presumably.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what, 25 years now that I've been doing stuff with them, or like exploring personally. Sure. And then working with it. Yeah. I mean, I found it quite early on. I mean, it was, well,
yeah. Well, we're so excited about the academic partnership, and what that means, everyone, just parenthetically, is that you can study at Monroe Institute with people like Luigi and others, and go through a series of courses with them. And then when you finish the course of study, you can bring that into Ubiquity University and write a master's or PhD dissertation, which deepens your knowledge, but also deepens the knowledge of the Monroe Institute in some of the areas that you would be exploring after your learning journey with them. It's a very innovative way to learn. So Monroe Institute is an institute that we're very fond of and support very enthusiastically. So thank you, Luigi.
Thank you, Jim.
Bob Monroe set the gold standard.
He did, but what he also did, I mean, which is why I found it really interesting. He said, "Go find out for yourself." I mean, it isn't just theoretical; it's the theoretical part is important. But I think with all these things, and especially with what we're going to be doing, I mean, David and I are going to be exploring when we talk about the history and so on. But it's like, well, how do you use this? You know, how do you connect with it? Because it's a remembering process. It's something that, you know, you were talking about learning a language in a way, but it's actually your first language. You know, we come in as non-verbal beings, and then we add verbal on top of it, and then we think that that's what it is. And actually, the biggest learning that we make. I mean, I've got a 3-year-old son, right? He has an internalized verbal language, and yet he's having to learn how to experience this reality, to dissect his senses into meaningful things that then are objectified, and learn the greatest things, you know, being human, without any verbal language. And then we go, oh yeah, taxes.
Yeah.
How do I do reports and whatever else. So it's actually a remembering process. It's not this dismantling and like what David was saying about the Zen koans, that is exhausting. What we call, like at Monroe, we talk about left and right hemispheres a lot, and this is like left hemisphere rationality. And what we're going into is the broader, more interconnected right hemisphere reason. That's the bit that gets the gestalt. That's the bit that gets the whole, and it's typically non-verbal. And the more you can sort of exhaust that narrativizing of reality to sink into the deeper appreciation of all the information streams that are coming in, then the more information you've got available to interact with.
Exactly. Well, let's build on that, and starting with you, David, why don't you just describe, both of you, what you intend to cover in this course for people who are interested in knowing more about the history and nature of remote viewing and remote perception?
Well, there is a lot in this course. People, I mean, you've just had a couple of examples from Luigi and I. People come to this field and this area of investigation from very diverse directions, and it can take a while to find your feet and have a framework within which to place your own experiences and to understand where things fit into the bigger picture. So what we're aiming to do is to go very broad and shallow to give a good overview, so that when you come across new experiences or research or claims, you can kind of slot them in and compare them to what's come before, but also to offer some little mini deep dive experiential things. So we're going to start with a very quick whistle-stop tour of the history of Psi very broadly. So starting with esoteric magical traditions and comparing, things like evocation and talking to spirits with what people are doing now. Then we're going to do people like Upton Sinclair and René Walcollier, early, less formal, but still pretty good attempts at psi experimentation. Obviously, Bob Monroe and the Monroe Institute, which Luigi will talk about more. So that's going to be our first week, will be this whistle-stop tour of the history, kind of wrapping up with remote viewing and the US military's psychic spying program, because some very useful things have come out of that, which have been declassified. We can use them. That's how I learned. There's some really useful protocols and tools that we can take from that. And we're gonna have a go. I think we've got oh yes, in the second week we're gonna have a go, and everybody's gonna do some remote viewing. So Luigi, you want to take over for the second week? We can share this out.
Yes, I don't have it in front of me, actually. Sorry.
Right.
So,
because there's Luigi's going to prepare some Monroe sound science. Is that what it's called?
Yes. So, yep. Sorry. So, in terms of the sound technology, I mean, the sound has evolved in some ways. The history where the Monroe Institute fits in here is that, as some of you know, there's a pretty significant declassified document where the US Army sent personnel to be trained in non-local perception, specifically trying to facilitate psychic spying, and that led to a report being made about the experiences of a particular Army general at Monroe during the Gateway program, and he wrote this report, and then it was classified, and the CIA obviously were given it, and they put their stamp on it, and then declassified it. So it's a CIA declassified document, but it's an Army document, right? So if that makes sense. And the goal there with Bob Monroe was can certain sound combinations help a participant to be able to expand their consciousness, to connect with the field, as it were, to be able to pick up on information at what seems like a distance. And the answer is yes. I mean, it's not just about the sound combination, but about the intention as well. And there's all kinds of things that we're going to bring into that second week in order to be able to facilitate doing it yourself. And, one of the things that we also found is that, I mean, you can do it through like out of body type techniques, I go into the target, but that's probably not the most efficient way of doing it, because out of body people start getting distracted by all kinds of things as they're, and they can start to project a lot of things onto the environment as well. So it's not the cleanest way of getting information at a distance. So Bob, he was developing a specific type of protocol to relax the mind, to reduce cool down periods where the viewer could, not be distracted and just almost be like a blank slate, but also to perceive through all of their senses without interpreting. So just get into the raw data. So we're going to be going into that really, so that we don't left brain it. One of the things that I find a lot, like during the Gateway program, we have a section on remote viewing and remote perception, and we show a target, and there will be some people in the group who will absolutely nail it, and they get super excited, and they're usually the ones, by the way, who are like, this is all bull, let me just whatever, and they just squiggle something, and then like their squiggles are absolutely spot on, and then they go, ooh, I'm great at this, let's get the second target, and then they bomb, they just totally suck. And that's because, I mean, there's many reasons for this. I'm sure David and I will go into it in that second week, but they just try to get the left brain to say, what did I just do?
Yeah.
And the left brain makes a story of what they just did. Oh, well, what you did was you did this, this, and this. And it's all retrofitted. And now when they try to do that, it moves them away from getting to the target. So it's more of an allowing, gathering information type of process. And you just go to the raw data. Yeah, David, do you want to jump in?
I was going to say, it's the hardest thing. People often say, well, what do I do? And the answer is nothing. You don't do anything.
Yes.
The more you're trying to do it, it won't work. And that experience you just described, Luigi, with people's second go being a disaster is so common. And you can also conceptualize it as ego wanting to take ownership of the results.
Yes,
you said, I'm so great at this. And it can't do it. The ego and the intellect is not the psychic part of us. So it takes a while to build that relationship in a way that's going to help you learn your own language, learn that non-verbal language, and interpret data more cleanly.
Yeah, there's something really interesting there about what we mean by the ego here, and that bit that has a story. I mean, coming back to the left and the right hemisphere, there's a lot of neuroscience now that says that the left hemisphere always operates in the past, even 400 milliseconds. It's always object matching. So categories and objects. And so it lives in a kind of disconnected, cold, dead world. It's all about things that are being filtered through the right hemisphere. And then, like, what does that fit in terms of my previous experience? So if you're operating from that kind of, I need to like try to be logical and rational, then you're not actually connected to what's flowing in through the present moment, through your senses. So because of that, you might have a method, but it's disconnected from the lived experience of reality. So it's not going to find the target. So this is why, we can have structures. And I'm not saying you dismiss the left hemisphere. I mean, it's half of your head, you need it. But we put it in its proper place. It's a servant to the right. And so when you're in the right, then you allow the flow, and then the left hemisphere structures it. And then it wants to interpret. It's like, no, you're not doing it. Let's go back to the lived experience of the here and now, and then you're back into the flow again. So this is the relationship that we're wanting to build. Right hemisphere dominant, feeding into the left, which gives it structure, and then you're back to the right. So right, left, right. And you find this even with the greatest inventions, the greatest insights in physics, in maths, in whatever creative pursuit, they think non-verbally. Einstein thought in music, and when he found an elegant solution, it wasn't just a logical process. It sounded nice in his head. The music resolved, and it's like, well, it's music. And some Nobel Prize winning mathematicians, they talk about, oh, what, people think in words? What? It's a revelation to them. They think in objects, they think in images. And then it's like, oh, well, that's elegant. And so then they sometimes intuit something, and then they have to spend years trying to work out how they can actually design experiments and so on to get them to that intuitive knowing. So it's not this incremental, let's just keep adding. It's actually drop all of that, and then you can start to build a process that actually gets you to something that you know intuitively.
Incidentally, if anybody's ever had a flash of inspiration in the shower, or dare I say it, sat on the toilet, this is the same mechanism, where you suddenly have to go and grab the back of an envelope to scribble on at a very inopportune moment. I expect many of us have experienced that. And if we define intuition very broadly as just unlearned knowledge, we know, but we can't say how we know, then practicing things like remote viewing within protocol, and doing the Monroe Institute exercises, and exploring all this territory and building that connection with the right brain, or the subconscious mind, is going to give you access to whatever that thing is, which brings those flashes of insight. So this isn't just a kind of irrelevant side quest kind of thing that is detached from reality. This is deeply relevant to how we can live our lives better. When you get more in touch with this, it will start to come in spontaneously. I mean, I've been saved from getting into a car wreck once by just knowing, oh, the psychic lamp up is happy, by just knowing that I had to pull over. And I did straight away without questioning it, because when that part of us speaks, it can speak in a way that you don't disagree with. And I felt like a bit of an idiot. I was sat there going, am I losing it? What am I doing? I'm obeying instructions from voices in my head. Do I need to see a doctor? And at that moment, a car came absolutely flying around the blind bend in front of me. It was down a steep hill, so they'd just gone too fast and lost control, and I would have been just there, and they would have crashed right into my driver's door. So I would be dead or very seriously injured if it weren't for that insight. I think that's the most dramatic time it's happened. A couple other times, it's just gone, look up, and I've looked up, and a shooting star has whizzed right above my head, which occasionally happens, and is just a nice thing. But yeah, getting plugged into this thing can just help in every aspect of your life. This isn't just a really sort of narrow, external, impersonal thing we can do. It's a really deeply relevant personal thing.
And do you offer practices for how people can access that? Because it's easy to say, but for the Western overly educated left brain individual, it's hard to get at. So are there particular practices that you're going to offer in the course?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to be using Monroe Sound Science, which is if you look at the original hemisync technology, it's the binaural beat technology, and it's still used in most of our programs today. And we've been developing the technology further by applying different methods of sound delivery as well, that we found allow us to maybe tap into some more of those gamma states that unfortunately binaural beat can't access so easily. So what we found is, and I mean, this wasn't our finding really, it was something that occurred, I think it was kind of like early 90s, where the Dalai Lama in particular allowed a bunch of monks to be tested in the lab and in MRI scanners and whatnot. And what they found was that when they were really feeling interconnected, like a loving kindness meditation, a heart-based meditation or something, their brainwave frequencies went through the roof. I mean, we're talking 100 hertz plus. Sometimes they were hitting like 200 cycles per second. Just to give you an idea, if you're paying attention to what I'm saying, your brain's probably around 14, 15 cycles per second, right? So these are like in like 100, 200. And so we thought something's interesting that is going on with gamma. And with gamma frequencies, you have a very strong sense of presence of the here and now. And you have gamma spiking when people have aha moments. Gamma spikes when you're lucid in a dream. So you see that gamma spikes when people are having out of body experiences. So you have like a low kind of delta and gamma happening at the same time. So we thought, well, maybe we can support what we call the focus levels with this gamma. And sure enough, we find that people then are not falling asleep as much. They're able to stay more present and so on during the experience. And one of the things then, so we'll be providing audio exercises for you to be able to practice with that help to get your brain in a particular configuration so that your left hemisphere doesn't dominate so much and you can tap into that field a little bit more. And so we'll go more into that, like what we call the focus levels, especially focus 10 and focus 12, mind awake, body asleep, and then expanded awareness, so that we can unlearn that process of your mind going to sleep with the body, that we can allow the body to move into the background while your mind expands a bit more and then connects to more. It can do it anyway. You typically do it when you fall asleep, but then you're unconscious, so a greater part of you is playing, but consciously you're not bringing it back unless you train yourself in particular ways. So we'll start that process off so you get the hands-on experience. But more than that, you've got the tools then to just keep practicing in between, because it is a learning thing. I mean, like you said, Jim, if you spent, say, 30 years honing your left hemisphere, then just listening to one track might not do it. But you can, neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing. It's evidenced in 90-year-olds. So you can retrain your brain to be able to change the channel a little bit more easily, to be able to tune into the greater reality, essentially.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you both. Let's turn now to the undergirding issue of all of this, and this is this phenomenon of consciousness. And I would love to have both of you just articulate your own view of what consciousness is and how you understand it, because the phenomenon of consciousness, as you pointed out earlier, Luigi, is generally taught to be, as kind of an epiphenomenon of your brain. Yeah. And as Rupert Sheldrake says, no, consciousness is the ocean, and your brain is a little receiver set for consciousness, much like a television or radio set is a receiver for electromagnetic waves that are omnipresent in the ether. So talk to us about consciousness and how both of you understand this extraordinary phenomenon.
I'll go first then.
Go on then.
So it's a big question, that, isn't it? What is the nature of consciousness? Well,
yeah.
This is uncomfortably right. Well, first of all, the idea of consciousness being emergent from the pile of fat and salty water inside our skulls is kind of ridiculous and outdated. So I think we can throw away that straw man immediately and not waste time on the materialist paradigm, because I think we're all here because we're over that, right?
We're over that, right?
It's my personal hunch, I guess. Current least bad opinion that consciousness is fundamental, and that it doesn't emerge or arise from anywhere within physical reality, but rather that it's the other way around. Physical reality is derivative or emergent from consciousness, rather than brains or microtubules or something somehow manufacturing the ability to be aware and to have experience. I like the who is it? Penrose and Hameroff's OR, orchestrated objective reduction, it is, theory, or the one about microtubules being a kind of interface between the physical wetware of cells and neurons and stuff and the quantum field, whatever that is. We've got to be really careful with these models, that when we say things like quantum field, we don't kid ourselves into thinking we actually know what that is.
That is,
that is a label that points to a bunch of equations which kind of explain or quite kind of describe, I should say, not explain, kind of describe how
Right.
something behaves. But that doesn't mean that it is a quantum field or that we know what a quantum field is or anything. It's just some maths which explains something really weird and wibbly wobbly. And there can be an impulse when we come across things which are very hard to understand in physicalist terms to go, to put it into the quantum bucket and go, oh, consciousness is quantum. What does that mean to say it is quantum? We're just going, well, quantum phenomena are sort of ineffable and odd and push over the boundary into what we can't measure or understand, and so does consciousness. So they must be the same thing. And I think we can maybe instead look at quantum phenomena as the bridge by which the underlying field of consciousness gets into physical reality, kind of like the internet connection, right?
Sort of building blocks.
Yeah. So the consciousness is there, and some part of us and goodness knows what else, and things that people call gods and ETs and deities and demons and all of that weird and wacky stuff is out there in consciousness, not in physical material reality. And it gets in via quantum effects, right? Because we know from experimental work that it's very easy for consciousness to affect physical reality at the quantum level. When we use random event generators, these use quantum noise sources. So quantum mechanical effects are influencing systems which produce electrical noise, such that that noise is genuinely, truly random. It is unpredictable. There is no mechanistic material mechanism by which we can know what that machine will do. And people can influence those with their mind quite easily. I actually have one just here, a true RNG thing. You can just plug this into your computer on USB. And I've written some software for that just to toy with it, because I wanted to see how easy is it to make it go up and down. Unbelievably easy, it turns out. I mean, perhaps that's my mind is maybe a little bit more amenable to doing it on command, but I haven't even played with it for a while because I sort of did it and went, oh, I was expecting to have to train to do this, but no, you just sort of go, oh, wouldn't it be fun if it went up? And it goes up. Our minds can influence these systems.
This
easily,
is like
right?
a little app that you can plug into your computer.
Yeah, it uses a couple of reverse bias diode junctions for anybody who's into electronics and knows what that means. But the important thing is that it's a system which produces completely, truly random, unpredictable events. So they can be used for consciousness research, or they could be used for cryptography. They're used to generate random, unpredictable numbers, right? But yeah, anybody can buy these things and play around with them and find that the smaller the effect you want to have, the easier it is to have it as a result of your will and your consciousness.
Well, I'd like to put the information in the chat. I'd like to get one.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'll put the link in the chat.
This is the first I've heard of it being accessible on an individual level, because normally you think of these random event generators like the Princeton Engineering, research lab, and there's the big, huge things, and you go into a room and you sit there and there's various things that you have to do. But to have that accessible, and I think this is important for what you were both talking about, that practice makes perfect. On all this, that there's these little techniques that we can all employ just day by day, or when we think of it, just plug something into your computer and start to train your brain to go to influence the random number generator in a way that you can see the effect of your consciousness. That's great, David. I love this.
But okay, so a contrast between that, which is very easy. If I want to turn this cup into a rabbit using my mind, it's not going to work, right? It's much harder to influence macro systems than microsystems.
But I mean, we do things like fork and spoon bending, so matter is more amenable than we think. But there is an interesting thing there. The two elements there that you really kind of hit on, David, is that the brain, the consciousness is not confined to the brain. It's not reduced down to the brain. It exists as a field or an underlying principle of reality. And so it's not this epiphenomenal, byproduct. That doesn't even mean much. I mean, when you look at, materialist reductionism, you've got to look at the philosophy behind science, and then that turns it into scientism, and that's kind of what we're going to be challenging here, and forms part of the history, I suppose. Not in any great way, but just to say it's hard to do science without having a philosophy behind it, and if you aren't aware of the philosophy, then that's just the bias. I mean, a lot of the time people will just throw stuff out just because it shouldn't be possible, and that's a wonderful belief system. And this is going to find what it's expecting to find, which is not consciousness being local and all that kind of stuff. It's going to find a lot of weird results that it's going to file. But think, in the way that Penrose, Hameroff discuss it, and it was articulated before them. You can look at the brain more like a transceiver, and this was the metaphor that Bob Monroe certainly used, where you're filtering, you're shaping your experience of a greater fundamental consciousness based on brain activity. It's radio signals are around us all the time. We can't hear them. If we learn to tune in, that's where the focus level language came from. If you focus in, if you learn to change the channel, then you'll pick up on things. And consciousness, the way we talk about it, makes it a thing, and it's not. It's a flowing process, and we are as well. So when we talk about things that are physical and non-physical, then really we're just talking about a perspective that makes it seem as if there's a thing that's physical and a thing that's non-physical. But think more in terms of frequency, and you're there. But as I said, it's a process. So if there's anything in your mind that's fixing things down and reducing things down into anything, even if you're saying I'm not into materialism or reductionism, but then you have spiritual ideas that reduce down into something, then that's going to limit you in exactly the same way as the scientism of today. So it's maybe more open to phenomenon, but it distances you from that phenomena as well. So one of the things that we've got to kind of play around with here is look at those categories and say, are they useful? And then allow that to shift you into something that's a lot more open. So this is really, one of the kind of, I suppose, a primary point that we're trying to get across in our course, which is, yes, there are physiological correlates of psi and all that kind of. We'll cover all of that, but there's something that Joe McMoneagle, and those of you that don't know, he's a famous remote viewer. He talks about this idea that he calls it the boggle zone, and he said when he first started, I think you might know what I'm going to say, David. When he first started, he was just as rigid as anybody else, right? I mean, he was in the army, he was in Vietnam, and so following orders, this is what we do. And then he started to notice psychic phenomena. I mean, he had some things in his past as well, but in that very controlled way, which is what remote viewing has as a protocol that distinguishes it from typical clairvoyance. There's a structured protocol, and he was getting hit after hit. And now his hypothesis of reality, which is there's a material world and then there's not, nothing perhaps, or it's a byproduct of this, didn't fit anymore. That there's linear time and then you don't find linear time. Then those old hypotheses don't fit anymore. But that leads to a discomfort, which is quite sizable. And the left hemisphere hates that because it can't put a category or an object around it. So now you're in discomfort. Now you're exposed in the open, and you're in what's called the boggle zone. And then because you haven't formed the new theory yet of whatever that new reality looks like, so you're in this in between. And sometimes your left hemisphere can come in with the most ridiculous explanation as to what just happened, to kind of massage over, just gloss over the data, just to say, come back to safety, come back to the known. And that feels comfortable, but it isn't true, and then that will, maybe you'll retreat into that. And so the way we want to do this and frame this in the course here is little repeated experiments, lots of data points going in that just gently move you along, so that you're not just blown open and then it's like, what the heck is reality? And you're sort of like, rocking yourself to sleep at night. It's yeah, we've been there, but there's a gentler way of doing this, and it can be multiple data points, so gently just keep getting the data. Thankfully, like Ubiquity University, just getting stuff out there to say there's another way of viewing reality. Go and explore that. There are other frameworks. There are scientists now. There are biologists now that are catching up with physicists. Biology was stuck 100 years behind physics. Now it's saying actually things are flowing processes rather than the mechanistic model is being dismantled. There are no selfish genes. That's bull, right? So there's these symbiotic relationships, and this is what consciousness and that kind of more Sheldrake kind of expanded mind, morphogenic fields, and so on, is being evidenced more and more in biology as well. And there isn't this thing like billiard balls bouncing off each other, atoms. I mean, atoms are swarms of things as well, not things, processes. So think in terms of frequency, think in terms of energy and processes, and you're going to be closer to reality. It's not something that can be nailed down.
I think I want to add to that as well, to think in terms of personal meaning. Because a lot of these phenomena, once you get outside of the nuts and bolts and the bricks and mortar, once you get away from the familiar material world into non-local consciousness-y phenomena of whatever sort, the way we experience these phenomena has a big element of projection, right? So what we're seeing is not how the thing is, we're actually seeing to a large extent how we are. Yes. And people do see the material world in that way too, but it's less of a problem there because there's some sort of consensus about what it is. But people can have, profound, meaningful, and disruptive experiences with non-local phenomena, and then make the mistake of saying, well, the phenomena is like this because that's how I experienced it. But actually what you've experienced is a mixture of the contents of your own mind or subconscious or whatever, and some kind of phenomena as well. So teasing those apart is a delicate but a very important thing we mustn't forget to do. And I just want to chip in one of my favorite quotes here that's a good thing to always remember, which is that all models are wrong and some are useful. So we have ideas like quantum physics and ETs and consciousness and remote viewing and all this stuff. And we got to remember, these are just little descriptive models. They're just little left brain stories, and they have limits, right? We have to be careful to make sure we're not running over those limits and overextending the model to where it's no longer useful.
Yes.
Someone just put in the chat a very interesting question while we're on the domain of consciousness, whether aren't we creating consciousness by the thoughts we think? Because energy follows thought. And that's an interesting question in two ways. One, the relationship between thinking and consciousness. And the other is, can the total amount of consciousness be increased? So are we, as we live and perceive, and are we contributing to consciousness in some way? How would you guys comment on that?
Yeah, well, I commented in the chat. It is a great question. I thought we're creating a story in consciousness. I don't. The consciousness is consciousness, and if it's primary, then everything is something in consciousness or a perspective of consciousness, and so I don't think you can make the awareness in consciousness more complex. I don't think it's necessarily that you're adding to it, for instance, but you can make it more complex. So information could become more complex.
So in your view, consciousness is just...
Consciousness is consciousness. Because as soon as you start saying, okay, well, am I going to create some more consciousness, then actually now you've got consciousnesses, you're splitting it. And, because, and then it's no longer fundamental. So, it's kind of a closed system interacting with itself, and we don't know whether there's anything outside of that, because that wouldn't be the consciousness that we know. So maybe there is, right? But we wouldn't have access to it because we're of that, you know. So I kind of take I think it was Nagel who was talking about the view from nowhere. We can't really get it, you know, as a philosophy because we're in the system. We're all, so we're a product of consciousness, and therefore to think beyond ourselves is not. We can't get outside the system because of that, you know. So
this is the same thing of like why science can't explain the limitations of science.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
the limitations of language. You know, you can't use a model to look at the outside of the model. It's only this big and contained, and we've got to say, well, we're in here, so let's just deal with this, whatever it is.
But it is a fabulous question. I think that what we can do is increase complexity in the system, and you know, from you know, then maybe this would open up a whole other discussion about, but like Bob Monroe, when he was meeting non-physical entities and talking with his inspect, which he referred to as an intelligent species, you know, that some of the conversations there were about, well, you know, you while you're in this system, you can only go so far. And then you when you go into that kind of level 2, you're no longer in it, you know. So it's while you're here, your game is to increase the application of the recognition and application of free will. You know, it needs to be trained, and so that is something that I think is growing in the system, where there are more people waking up. You can think of all the extra atrocities in the world and everything, but the other polarity is that more and more people are exploring themselves and finding inner answers and working with their consciousness to elevate it in some way and to facilitate other people being able to do it. So that's increasing the complexity and the learning that happens in the system. If we're using more of a kind of
that's
computational language.
Yeah, that's Nassim Haramehn's point. You know, the physicist, he says that at the quant level, that ultimately, he says, consciousness is a learning system, which I thought was an interesting way to define consciousness, because it's always learning, so that as we think or we act or we interact together, we're manifesting consciousness through the uniqueness of our own particular space-time coordinates. And the little integers that make up everything that is are going in and out, consciousness manifestation. So every new act of manifestation is brought back into the pool of consciousness, and that innovation expands it. Does that make sense to you guys?
Oh, yeah,
that's the Akashic field, right? That's the Akashic field.
If you would like to come at that problem from an intellectual left brain perspective, information theory, the branch of mathematics, is very useful. It contains some ideas which do map over directly to this area. I mean, I'm not recommending that you do take that approach, but if you need to, that's where to go.
You know,
so you're saying if it helps me get through the night, it's okay.
It helps anybody, you know, like to if you understand consciousness in a kind of quantitative way, information theory is a good way to do it.
Yeah, gotcha.
But what I will say is it is useful to have these theories and these models, but remembering always that the map is not the territory, you know.
The map is not the territory. Gotcha. You're right, David. You're right.
And I mean, there can be better and better maps.
My left brain was getting overactive,
and we'd love the left brain to get involved. Because if the left brain doesn't have a buy-in, it acts like a gatekeeper to stop you from actually experiencing it directly. We need the theory there to allow the left brain to say, okay, well, I'm going to abdicate for a bit and allow a deeper knowing, which is you know, relational. You need to connect with it. Yeah.
So
we will explore this in the course.
Yeah. No, this is good. Now, let me ask another domain of inquiry. How do you guys, knowing that consciousness is infinite, and in consciousness, you've got all modalities of clairvoyance, space-time shape-shifting, Uri Geller's bending spoons, you know, all the stuff that happens when you go into the paraphenomenal realm. You you guys are talking about remote viewing. So I'd love to hear both of you differentiate this practice of remote viewing from the other. I mean, is remote viewing different than mental telepathy? Is remote viewing different than remote perception?
Sure.
What are the students going to really learn at a particular level in this course about fractal of consciousness, remote viewing?
So remote viewing is not a very good term for what it means, and it was coined at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, sometime in the 70s, I guess, to describe what they were doing with their psychic development science program. And it is fundamentally a laboratory protocol where the remote viewer will describe a specific target, which is traditionally written on a bit of paper inside a sealed envelope. So there is one thing that you are supposed to describe, and you don't get points for describing other stuff, right? Then they record their perceptions, usually in the form of a written transcript. And then when they finished, then they get feedback and they find out what was it that you were supposed to describe. And that doesn't put any limitation or have any opinion about how you get the information. So if you really want, you can read tarot cards or throw bones or examine chicken entrails. As long as you can write me a nice summary that explains in English what the target is, I really don't care what tools you use to get it. We have commonly used tools in the world of remote viewing, like controlled remote viewing and all the other methods like Birdie's mapping thing that she's doing. There's loads of different ways to help the left brain to kind of get out of the way and get with the program so that we can develop these develop the skills so that we can get higher fidelity information. All of them involve breaking your target down into small bits. What those bits are and how you break it down is the difference between them, really. They're big Q&A sessions. So controlled remote viewing starts off with, is it the ocean, or is it a mountain, or is it a building? Very basic. And then how about what color is it? Is there any other colors? Does it smell of anything? So very basic sensory stuff building up. You're not having a full-blown, in-depth OBE style thing. Extended remote viewing, which is done in a trance, you can have that experience. You can just see something and go, I know exactly what this is, without going through any of that preamble, right? And both of them are remote viewing if you do them within that protocol, where you're doing a specific target on purpose, you record your perception, you get feedback. So remote viewing is not a very good term, but that's what the term means. So it's not just talking about visual perception, even though it sounds like it is. So remote perception would have perhaps been a better one for them to pick because it's multisensory, it's conceptual, it's any kind of information, right? And that's in the title of our course because we didn't want this to be a course just about remote viewing, right? Because remote viewing is a very big subject, but it's quite narrow in the overall realm.
Perception is a bigger category.
Yeah. Because
more accurate to how the majority of people get the information. I mean, they're not just viewing it.
When I got saved from my car wreck, I didn't have a specific target I was viewing on purpose and recording my perceptions and getting feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew to pull over, right?
Yeah.
So we're including
now. Is that remote perception or is that intuition? What you experienced?
Well, I think we're defining remote perception as any kind of non-local awareness.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's very broad.
Yeah. We're covering everything we can because we want to provide a knowledge framework, a landscape so that people can really find their feet amongst all of the weird and wonderful little niches and back alleys of the worlds of Psi.
Right. I think that's a good, very important point so that we should, here on Humanity Rising, I should stop talking about remote viewing and start talking more about remote perception as a larger category for a very differentiated phenomenon because everyone who engages in it does it in their own unique way.
Well, I think within the protocol is what makes it remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important. If you've got somebody who has opinions about what a thing is like, if I ask you now, Jim, can you describe the Eiffel Tower to me? You will go, oh, well, it's tall, it's metallic, it's got lots of rivets, it's grey, it smells like baguettes, it's noisy, my wallet feels empty. You'll be able to describe it. But how much of that psychic data and how much of it is your imagination or your knowledge?
Left brain, because I've been there, right?
So this idea of blinding it keeps us honest, right? And it means that we can separate out what is non-local perception and what is imagination. And that makes it really powerful as a tool to learn our own language, right? Which is what we want to do. We want to know, when are we listening to ourselves in that inner non-verbal, non-local data, and when's it our imagination?
Yes.
And we want to learn to pick those two apart. So remote viewing is really valuable there, because you can say, well, I'm going to be psychic. Oh, I'm going to describe something. And then you can say a bunch of stuff. But is it psychic data? Is it your imagination? Is it noise? What is it? You don't know. And so that's the value of remote viewing.
Yeah, got you. It creates a discipline of awareness and helps you parse those aspects of yourself that are noise, and those aspects that are really seeing what's inside that envelope.
Yeah, exactly. So we learn over time to differentiate, what does it feel like when I'm making things up and kidding myself, versus what does it feel like when I'm perceiving. And it takes a lot of practice. And it's important, once you've done your session and you open your envelope, or usually we open a PDF file these days and see what it was. You go back through, well, what did I experience there? What's correct? What's incorrect? What was going on there? And you really introspect on your own experience. And that's how you can kind of build this awareness.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very informative. Thank you very much. Well, let me just begin to bring this session to a close. Been fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the course because I'm going to be signed up and taking it along with everybody else, because I'm one of these overeducated left-brain North American white males that has a long way to go to get to where certainly you guys are, but just to feel that I have some facility in it. So I'm really at the kind of the kindergarten or preschool level. So I'm really looking forward to your course. But just summarize, by the end of the 4 weeks, and the course, everyone, is starts on the 20th of February, so next week, at 11 a.m. Pacific. And then the same time over the next 4 weeks, David and Luigi will be explaining and leading us into practices of remote perception. At the end of the 4-week course, guys, what's a reasonable takeaway for the students? What do you want them to be able to do as a result of your course?
Sure, I'll do
go
that
on.
one.
And yeah.
We wrote all this out very nicely, so you can go and get the more detailed version on the course details page. But
I put the link in the chat several times.
We want people to be able to find their feet in the field, right? To have an idea of the landscape, what's come before, what's happening now, what is it possible for you to do right now? What are some models of how it works? So that when you come across new things or try new things, you've got some context to fit it into, so that people are kind of empowered to navigate this quite broad and confusing field. Is the really broad goal. I mean, we want people to have that from an intellectual level, but we also want people to have first-hand experience, so that when they're reading accounts of things, they can go, "Oh, that sounds like my experience," or "That sounds like bull," to help start building some. Because a lot of people say a lot of things in this field, and it's helpful to start building up some filtering there about some of the more outlandish claims, but also to understand the mechanisms of how those things can come about, without people deliberately being dishonest, right? Or, people are often not lying, but they're presenting their own subjective experience as if it is applicable to everybody, as if it's part of a consensus reality, when in fact it's a reflection of them. You can find a lot of YouTube channels with people saying all sorts of crazy but contradictory things, right? And that's, I think, what's happening there. So we got a whole model on the trickster in Psi, which is this kind of deceptive, confusing element, which can make it really hard to understand what's going on. So that kind of feeds into the overall idea of empowerment and kind of grounding within the intellectual landscape.
Yeah.
Sorry, that wasn't very brief. Is there anything you want to add,
Oh,
Luigi?
no. That's
No, we'll
good.
just that we'll be using the
Luigi.
sound technology to support that for having direct experience of this as well. So, there's the theoretical, but there's also the facilitated altered states of consciousness exploration, which will be providing information on, and you can go and play with it if you want to.
Brilliant. Well, this is very exciting. Thank you both so much. This is the science of consciousness and remote perception, everyone. And as I said at the beginning, this is what's up for humanity. This may be among the most important courses you'll ever take as you consider the human future. So I really want to encourage
We think so.
to avail themselves. And you can take it live, but we know people are working, so every course is convened live but recorded. So you can sign up for the course and then take it at your leisure at any time asynchronically. But this is an important domain. So thank you.
So
David and Luigi will join
take
us
the
in the
course.
after chat for a few minutes. So you're welcome to ask them any questions that you would like to inquire around. You'll see the link to the after chat in the chat box. Stan's putting it in, and you received the link in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow, everyone, is Valentine's. So we're going to take a little journey, maybe through remote perception, to the beautiful city of Chartres in France, where each year for 20 years now, we have been making pilgrimage to immerse ourselves into the love of the sacred feminine. It's a site that's been associated with beauty and love and healing for thousands of years, and we go there every year. So we're going to be talking about Chartres and our upcoming pilgrimage there in July. So that's tomorrow on Valentine's on Humanity Rising. But David and Luigi, thank you so much. This has been really inspiring. I can hardly wait for your course. That's next Thursday, the 20th, here on Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.